Welcome to our deep dive. We're just incredibly thrilled to have you joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here.
We spend a lot of time on this show looking at concepts and historical events, but today we have a mission that feels profoundly different.
It really does.
Yeah, we are unpacking a massive stack of sources for you. We're talking historical archives, early 20th century medical records.
Investigative journalism reports.
Exactly. And deeply personal diaries. And we're using all of this to explore a story that, frankly, it defies belief.
It really does.
It's a story that begins like this glittering, glamorous 1920s fairy tale, full of wonder, scientific miracles. But it ends as one of the most profound, heartbreaking, and honestly horrifying chapters in American labor history.
It reads like a narrative of absolute extremes. When
Right.
we were looking through these materials, I just kept thinking about how fast the tone shifts.
Yeah, giving you whiplash.
Right. It goes from the sheer magic of scientific discovery straight to the absolute darkest depth of corporate negligence.
It's dark. It's so dark. But to really understand where we're going today, I want you to imagine something.
Okay.
Just put yourself in this scenario for a second. I want you to imagine being offered a job.
A good job.
Not just a good job. Imagine a job that pays 3 times the average salary of the era.
Wow.
Right. A job that instantly catapults you into the top 5% of female wage earners in the entire country.
That's life-changing money.
Exactly. And the work itself. It involves handling the most expensive, most sought-after, most quote-unquote magical substance on Earth.
A substance that literally makes you glow in the dark.
It sounds like pure magic.
It does. It sounds like a dream come true for the young women who took these jobs.
But we need to unpack this. Because, as you're going to see, this deep dive is going to transition very sharply.
Very sharply.
From that magical wonder into a gripping, terrifying tale of corporate cover-ups.
Yeah.
And just unimaginable physical suffering.
Yeah. This isn't just a history lesson that we're dusting off for the sake of it.
Not at all. It's a story about a forgotten injustice.
It's a story about corporate betrayal on a massive scale. But most importantly, it is the story of a group of young women whose fierce, relentless fight for justice ultimately changed the modern world for every single one of us.
Every single one of us.
The workplace protections you and I take completely for granted today. They exist because of the women we are going to talk about today.
But before we really get into the timeline and the science, we do need to offer a brief disclaimer.
Right. Good point.
This story deals heavily with historical corporate negligence, labor disputes, the battle between workers and industry.
Heavy stuff.
Very. And we are going to be reporting the documented facts straight from the source material we've gathered.
We are not endorsing any modern political viewpoints here.
Exactly. Neither left-wing nor right-wing.
Our goal is just to convey the ideas, the facts, and the realities contained in these original historical sources impartially.
We are just here to tell you what happened.
And what happened is staggering enough without adding anything else to it.
So let's set the scene. The year is 1898. We're in Paris.
Paris in the late 1890s.
Yep. Marie and Pierre Curie have just discovered a brand new element.
Radium.
Radium. It's an alkaline earth metal, and it possesses properties that absolutely baffle the scientific community at the time.
Because it's highly radioactive.
Right. It's constantly decaying, and as a result of that decay, it gives off energy.
It gives off heat.
And crucially for our story today,
When mixed with the right compounds, it gives off a mysterious, beautiful blue-green light.
that light changed everything.
Marie Curie herself actually wrote about how those gleamings seemed suspended in the darkness. She said it stirred them with emotion and enchantment.
Enchantment. That's the perfect word for how the world reacted.
But actually getting your hands on it,
Oh, almost impossible.
right, extracting it was incredibly difficult. The Curies had to refine it from massive, massive amounts of uranium ore.
Specifically, these minerals called carnotite and pitchblende.
Pitchblende, yeah. And because it was so incredibly rare and so painstakingly difficult to purify, it became the most valuable substance on the planet.
To give you a sense of that value,
Let's hear it.
by the 1910s and 1920s, a single gram of radium cost $120,000.
A single gram.
Yeah. And if we adjust that for inflation to today's money,
What is it?
you are looking at roughly $2.2 million
Wow.
for a single gram.
$2.2 million for a gram. That alone tells you how highly it was prized by society.
It's unbelievable. But here's where it gets really interesting. The public didn't just view radium as a fascinating scientific anomaly, something to be studied in a lab.
No, they definitely did not.
They viewed it as a literal miracle.
Because it gave off energy continuously, right?
Exactly. Seemingly without losing any mass, which completely violated classical physics as they understood it at the time.
People associated this element with endless vitality.
They dubbed it liquid sunshine.
Liquid sunshine. It became a full-blown consumer craze.
A craze doesn't even begin to cover it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the early 20th century, you have a society that is rapidly industrializing.
Rapidly advancing.
And perfectly primed to believe in scientific miracles.
And since doctors had begun using targeted radium to treat certain tumors,
the general public just leapt to this wild conclusion.
they figured, hey, if a little radiation cures cancer,
A massive amount of radiation must cure everything else.
it makes sense if you don't know any better. And the products they made are mind-boggling.
I was reading the list from our sources, and it's almost comical.
Until you remember the biological reality of what this substance actually does.
Right. They put radium in drinking water.
Selling it as a cure for arthritis, gout, high blood pressure,
They put it in face creams.
compact powders, promising it would restore youthful vitality and literally make your skin radiate.
Well, they weren't lying about the radiating part.
No, they weren't. There was radium butter,
Radium milk.
radium toothpaste that guaranteed a brighter smile with every brushing.
They even had a radium eclipse sprayer to
Yeah.
kill flies and mosquitoes in your home.
And yes, they even made radium-laced lingerie.
And jock straps.
Oh, the jock straps to quote-unquote restore vitality.
It was inescapable. There was even a hit song on Broadway called The Radium Dance.
It was the ultimate luxury item and the ultimate health fad rolled into one.
But the real industrial boom for radium, the thing that created the massive factories we're going to discuss today,
It wasn't in cosmetics or tonics.
it was driven by the military.
When the United States entered World War I in 1917, the nature of warfare had fundamentally changed.
Trench warfare.
Exactly. It required precise timing, often in the dead of night.
Soldiers needed to be able to read their watches and their instrument panels in the pitch black.
Without lighting a match.
Yeah.
Because lighting a match in a trench,
Would instantly give away your position to an enemy sniper.
it was a death sentence. The military needed a solution, and an inventor named William J. Hammer provided one,
He figured out that if...
which acts as a phosphor, essentially a substance that exhibits luminescence.
Right, and you add a little bit of glue and water, you get a paint that glows brilliantly in the dark.
It never needs to be charged by the sun.
It is entirely self-luminous.
The military demanded millions of these glowing watch dials and airplane instruments.
Millions.
Yeah.
And to meet this massive, sudden demand, corporations like the United States Radium Corporation in New Jersey
The Radium Dial Company in Illinois,
and the Waterbury Clock Company in Connecticut, they opened these sprawling factories.
which brings us to the human element of the sources. Who was actually doing the meticulous, incredibly delicate work of painting these tiny watch dials?
It was young women,
The company specifically recruited women.
many of them in their late teens, some as young as 14 or 15.
Just kids, really.
They were often working class, many from recent immigrant families.
And for these girls, getting a job at the radium plant wasn't just employment.
It was like winning the lottery.
It was widely viewed as a glamour job. Let's break down the economics for you.
They were paid by the piece. About a penny and a half for every single dial they painted.
Doesn't sound like much now, but a fast worker could paint 250 dials a day.
Which meant taking home about $20 a week.
In 1920s money,
For a working-class teenager, that was astronomical.
adjusted for inflation, we are talking about the equivalent of $40,000 a year today,
Imagine being 15 years old and bringing home more money than your father.
who is probably breaking his back in a foundry or a steel mill.
The social dynamic this created is fascinating.
Hmm.
These young women suddenly had tremendous financial independence.
They had pin money to spend on the burgeoning consumer culture of the 1920s.
They were the absolute epitome of the new woman of the era.
Independent, earning their own keep, engaging in the modern world on their own terms.
And the work environment itself was incredibly appealing.
If you think about the typical factory jobs available to women at the time,
Grim, dangerous, dirty textile sweatshops.
the dial painting studios were a paradise by comparison.
They were spacious, well-lit, clean, sociable. The girls sat in rows wearing their normal everyday clothes.
Chatting and gossiping with their friends while they painted.
But then there was the dust.
It does.
The radium dust was everywhere in these studios. It hovered in the air like a fine mist.
It settled on their hair, their shoulders, their dresses.
And because radium glows, the girls themselves began to glow.
They became known in their local towns as the Ghost Girls.
The visual of that is just so haunting, especially knowing what we know now about radiation.
When the girls left work and stepped out into the night, their dresses and hats would literally emanate this otherworldly blue-green phosphorescence.
And they loved it. I mean, why wouldn't they?
Every advertisement, every newspaper article, every executive told them this substance was the most beneficial, healthy, expensive thing on Earth.
They would intentionally wear their best party dresses to work on Fridays.
So the fabric would be heavily dusted with radium.
That way, when they went to the dance halls on the weekends, they would literally glow in the dark on the dance floor.
They even painted the leftover radium on their fingernails
Their eyelids.
and on their teeth so they could flash glowing smiles at their boyfriends in the dark.
It was a badge of honor in these communities, a sign of immense status that you worked at the radium plant.
But of course, this blissful glowing bubble was built on a foundation of terrible unseen danger.
And that danger wasn't just floating in the ambient dust.
No. The real catastrophe was baked into the very mechanics of how they did their jobs.
Let's look closely at that actual daily routine, because this is where the story shifts from innocent wonder to horrifying negligence.
The dials these girls were painting were microscopic in their detail.
The smallest pocket watch faces were only 3.5 centimeters across.
And the numerals they had to trace with the glowing paint were just 1 millimeter wide.
1 millimeter.
To accomplish this, they used extremely fine camel hairbrushes. Each brush only had about 30 hairs.
Anyone who has ever used a fine watercolor brush knows exactly what happens after a few strokes.
The water-based paint causes the bristles to spread out and lose their sharp point.
If the girls painted outside the lines of those delicate 1 millimeter parameters,
They'd be reprimanded.
or worse, their work would be rejected and they wouldn't get paid for that piece.
They needed a razor-sharp point on those brushes at all times.
So how did the supervisors instruct them to maintain that razor-sharp point?
They were explicitly taught a technique called lip pointing.
Or, as the girls called it on the floor, the lip dip paint routine.
The instructors told the girls to place the bristles of the brush between their lips.
Use their tongues and lips to twirl it into a perfect fine point.
Dip it into the radioactive paint, paint the dial.
And then, when the brush lost its shape, put the paint-covered brush right back into their mouths to do it again.
Hundreds of times a day.
And the sources show that the girls did ask if swallowing this paint was safe.
It's a natural question when you're putting a foreign chemical in your mouth constantly.
But they were universally assured by their managers and instructors that it was completely harmless.
Some executives, like the co-founder George Willis, even lectured the girls on how radium would actually give them rosy cheeks and make them healthier.
Instructors on the factory floor would even swallow some of the paint right in front of the girls to prove it was safe.
So the girls trusted them. They had no reason not to. The public was drinking this stuff in tonics.
The historical estimates calculate that a dial painter doing the lip pointing routine would ingest between 125 milligrams and 1.75 grams of radioactive paint every single day.
If you calculate the cumulative exposure over a year, these young women were ingesting thousands of microcuries of radium.
To give you a tangible analogy for what a microcurie represents in terms of atomic decay.
Imagine a microcurie as a tiny, invisible machine gun firing 37,000 microscopic bullets every single second.
Decades later, the safety standard for the maximum permissible body burden of radium was set at 0.1 microcuries.
These girls were ingesting amounts nearly 20,000 times that safe limit.
It makes you sick to your stomach just conceptualizing those numbers.
It really does.
And here is where the righteous indignation really sets in for anyone reading these historical files.
Oh, absolutely.
While these teenage girls were literally eating radium all day long, the men who ran the companies and the scientists who worked in the laboratories knew it wasn't safe.
There was a grotesque, intentional double standard at play here.
While the women on the factory floor wore their normal clothes and lip-pointed their brushes, the male chemists working in the extraction labs in the very same buildings were taking extreme precautions.
They used heavy lead screens.
They wore lead-lined aprons.
They handled the tubes of radium using long, ivory-tipped forceps so they wouldn't even touch the vials with their bare hands.
Dr. Sabin von Saki, who co-founded the U.S. Radium Corporation, and actually invented the undark paint formula.
He absolutely knew the dangers.
He had studied under the Curies in Europe.
And he knew that Pierre Curie himself had famously stated that he wouldn't care to trust himself in a room with a kilo of pure radium.
Because it would burn all the skin off his body, destroy his eyesight, and probably kill him.
Von Sachaki had first-hand, visceral experience with that wrath.
Early in his career, some radium had infiltrated his left index finger.
The tissue damage was so severe, the necrosis so rapid, that he literally hacked off his own finger to stop it from spreading.
He knew exactly what this element could do to human flesh.
Yet when he occasionally walked through the dial painting studio and saw the girls putting the brushes in their mouths,
He might offer a mild cryptic warning like, "Do not do that, you will get sick."
yeah, but he never issued a formal ban.
He never changed the company policy.
And he certainly never explained why they would get sick.
It wasn't like lip pointing was the only way to paint dials.
No, the technology existed to avoid this entirely.
In Europe, where dial painting had been going on a bit longer, they didn't use this technique at all.
In Switzerland, they used solid glass rods.
In France, they used small sticks with cotton wadding on the ends, or sharpened wooden styluses, or metal needles.
The American companies knew about these alternatives.
But the glass pens slowed down production.
And using rags or cotton wadding to wipe the brushes wasted the incredibly expensive radium paint.
So it came down to pure, cold economics.
The companies prioritized the speed of production and the conservation of the material over the health of their workers.
They essentially decided that it was cheaper to have the girls clean the brushes with their own mouths than to provide rags or alternative tools.
It is a stunning, horrific calculation.
That calculation leads us directly to the gruesome reality of what actually happens when human beings ingest massive quantities of radium.
Let's talk about the biology here, because it is crucial to understanding the horror these women faced.
Radium is an alkaline earth metal.
If you picture the periodic table you saw in high school chemistry, calcium and radium sit in the exact same vertical column.
To a human bone cell, they look like identical twins.
When the girls swallowed the radium paint, their digestive systems processed it.
But because radium is in the same chemical family as calcium, the human body gets profoundly confused.
It essentially says, oh, look, calcium, we need this to strengthen the skeleton.
So the body transports the ingested radium directly into the bloodstream and deposits it straight into the girl's bones.
It locked the poison deep inside their skeletal structure.
And remember, radium is radioactive.
It has a half-life of 1,600 years.
So once it was embedded in their jaws, their legs, their spines, it just sat there.
Constantly decaying. Constantly firing off heavy alpha radiation.
Alpha particles are relatively large and heavy compared to beta or gamma radiation.
If alpha radiation is outside your body, it's largely harmless. It can be stopped by a piece of paper or even the dead layer of skin on your arm.
But when it is inside your body, embedded directly in your bone matrix, it is utterly devastating.
Those alpha particles act like microscopic cannonballs,
firing point blank into the surrounding bone tissue and bone marrow 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
They were literally being irradiated from the inside out.
The radiation was boring microscopic holes into their bones, destroying the structural integrity of their skeletons.
And in the early 1920s, the tragic results of this internal bombardment began to manifest.
The symptoms usually started in the mouth, which makes sense given how the exposure occurred through the lips.
But also because the jawbone has a very high turnover rate for calcium.
We see this vividly in the heartbreaking story of Molly Maggia. She was one of the first, and her story is just a nightmare.
Molly worked at the New Jersey plant for about 4 years. In 1921, she went to the dentist for a simple toothache.
The dentist pulled the tooth, but the hole in her gum didn't heal. It became an open, seeping ulcer.
Then the tooth next to it started aching, so the dentist pulled that one too.
The tissue around the extraction sites began to die. It's a condition that eventually became known as radium jaw, or radium necrosis.
Because no one knew what was happening, the dentists were completely baffled.
They tried everything they could think of to stem the infection, but nothing worked. The necrosis just spread.
The patients suffered excruciating, constant pain, and a foul odor emanated from the rotting bone in their mouths.
Molly Maggia's condition deteriorated rapidly. The infection spread through her jaw up to the roof of her mouth and into the bones of her ears.
The sources recount a moment that is almost too visceral to describe, but you have to hear it to understand the reality of this negligence.
Molly went back to her dentist. He was examining her lower jaw, just touching it gently to assess the damage.
And to his absolute horror, Her entire lower jawbone was so brittle, so decayed from the radiation, that he literally lifted it out of her mouth with his bare fingers.
It just broke away from her skull.
It's unimaginable suffering.
And it wasn't just her jaw. The radiation was destroying her bone marrow, leading to severe aplastic anemia.
Her body couldn't produce enough red or white blood cells, leaving her exhausted and unable to fight off the massive infections.
By September 1922, the infection in Molly's jaw had burrowed so deep that it reached her jugular vein.
She suffered a massive, fatal hemorrhage and died.
She was only 24 years old.
Dozens of girls were falling ill with similar, terrifying symptoms. For some, it was their jaws. For others, the radium attacked different parts of the skeleton.
We read accounts of girls whose ankles simply splintered and collapsed under their own weight as they were walking down the street.
Their bones had become like honeycomb.
There were young women whose spines collapsed, forcing them to wear heavy steel braces from their necks down to their waists just to sit upright.
Others developed massive osteogenic sarcomas.
Bone tumors that grew to the size of grapefruits, riddling their bodies. Their legs had to be amputated.
And all the while, as their bodies were literally crumbling, their minds were perfectly sharp.
They knew exactly what was happening to them, even if they didn't yet understand why.
As the bodies piled up, and as more and more healthy young women in their early 20s became bedridden invalids, the dial painting companies found themselves in a precarious position.
The community started to notice.
The local dentists were whispering to each other, realizing that all these young women with necrotic jaws had one specific thing in common.
They all worked at the radium plant.
This is the critical pivot point in the narrative.
The companies could no longer simply plead ignorance. The evidence was mounting right at their doorstep.
And their response was not to halt operations, investigate the paint, or offer medical care to the dying girls.
Their response was to initiate one of the most callous, calculated corporate cover-ups in American history.
The tactics the United States Radium Corporation used are chilling.
In 1924, Arthur Roeder, the president of USRC, realized he had a mounting public relations disaster on his hands.
He needed an independent expert to investigate the plant and clear their name.
So he hired Dr. Cecil Drinker, a highly respected industrial hygiene expert from Harvard University, along with his wife, Catherine Drinker, and a colleague.
Roeder assumed Drinker would find some other cause for the illnesses.
Maybe poor hygiene at home, or an unrelated contagion.
But when Drinker and his team arrived at the Orange, New Jersey factory, they were appalled.
They didn't just find a few safety hazards. They found an environment completely saturated with radioactive dust.
Drinker observed the lip-coining routine firsthand, but it went far beyond that.
In his report, Drinker noted that every surface in the workroom was luminous in the dark. The chairs, the tables, the floor.
He wrote that the girls' hair, faces, hands, arms, dresses, and underclothes all glowed.
He even tested chairs that hadn't been used by the painters and found them covered in radium dust.
Drinker's conclusion was definitive. He stated emphatically that the continuous exposure to radium was the direct cause of the women's horrific health problems.
Specifically, the necrosis of the jaw.
He drafted a comprehensive report recommending immediate and sweeping safety precautions to protect the workers.
You would think a company president, handed a report from a Harvard expert saying, "Your factory is killing your workers," would take immediate action.
But Arthur Roeder did the exact opposite.
He rejected Drinker's findings outright.
He insisted that the illnesses must be caused by an infection contracted outside the factory.
Roeder even referenced a supposed internal company report that refuted Drinker's findings.
Though he conveniently refused to actually show it to Drinker.
When Drinker informed Roeder that he intended to publish his team's findings in a scientific journal, as was his academic right and moral duty,
Roeder threatened to sue him for libel and corporate espionage.
the Drinkers initially backed down under the threat of this massive corporate lawsuit.
But Roeder didn't stop there.
He took Drinker's comprehensive, damning report, fundamentally altered the findings, and submitted a forged version to the New Jersey Department of Labor.
This forged report explicitly claimed that, according to Harvard experts, every girl is in perfect condition.
It was brazen fraud, and it likely would have worked if it weren't for a colleague of Drinker's at Harvard, a woman named Dr. Alice Hamilton.
She was a pioneer in industrial toxicology and a fierce advocate for workers.
Through her connections in the labor movement, specifically the National Consumers League, she got her hands on the forged report submitted to the state.
She immediately wrote to Catherine Drinker, essentially saying, "The Department of Labor has a report showing every girl is in perfect condition. Do you suppose Roeder forged your report?
Confronted with the undeniable proof that the USRC had acted in profound bad faith and was using their names to perpetuate a deadly lie, the drinkers decided they couldn't stay silent.
They ignored the lawsuit threats and published their original damning report in a medical journal.
The publication of the drinker report was a huge step, but the company had another, far more insidious tactic to avoid paying workers' compensation and medical bills.
They engaged in a systematic smear campaign against the dying girls.
Because radium necrosis mimics the bone decay of certain advanced diseases, the U.S. Radium Corporation paid doctors and dentists to intentionally misdiagnose the girls.
They explicitly pressured medical professionals to attribute the deaths and illnesses to syphilis.
We have to understand the social context of the 1920s to grasp how evil this was.
Syphilis was a highly stigmatized, sexually transmitted infection.
For an unmarried, working-class young woman from a respectable, often Catholic immigrant family, a diagnosis of syphilis wasn't just a medical death sentence.
It was social ruin.
By putting syphilis on Molly Maggia's death certificate and doing the same to other girls, the company achieved two deeply cynical goals.
First, it legally protected them because syphilis is not an occupational disease, meaning they owed the families nothing.
Second, it shamed the surviving sick girls into utter silence.
The stigma was so profound that girls who were falling ill would hide their symptoms.
Refusing to see doctors for fear of being accused of promiscuity and ruining their families' reputations.
It was tactical gaslighting of the most vicious kind.
They even used ruse examinations. The sources highlight a Columbia University toxicologist named Frederick Flynn.
He was contracted by the USRC to examine the girls.
He would check them over, look at their crumbling jaws, and brightly pronounce them in perfect health, perhaps just needing a good toothbrushing.
And here's the kicker about Dr. Frederick Flynn. He wasn't even a medical doctor.
He had a PhD in an unrelated field and was completely unlicensed to practice medicine or offer clinical diagnoses.
But to a terrified 20-year-old girl, an authority figure in a white coat saying she was fine was enough to create doubt and delay her seeking real help.
The architecture of deception was staggering. The executives lied to the workers, lied to the government, falsified academic reports, and weaponized social stigma to cover up a mass poisoning.
But they severely underestimated the resolve of the women they were poisoning.
Which brings us to the monumental legal battles that finally brought this into the light.
These women, literally decaying while they breathed, refused to just fade away.
In New Jersey, the push for justice was led by a woman named Grace Fryer.
She was a bank teller who had previously worked as a dial painter for USRC.
When her teeth started falling out and her spine began to ache, she realized it was connected to the deaths of her former colleagues.
Grace Fryer's determination is astonishing. She decided to sue the United States Radium Corporation.
But deciding to sue a massive, politically connected defense contractor in the 1920s as a working-class woman was nearly impossible.
She spent 2 full years just trying to find an attorney who would even take the meeting, let alone take the case.
I want you to picture the psychological and physical toll of that. Walking from law office to law office, her spine deteriorating, her jaw aching, constantly having doors slammed in her face.
The legal hurdles were astronomical. Under New Jersey law at the time, occupational diseases were narrowly defined.
And radiation poisoning obviously wasn't on the list.
Furthermore, the statute of limitations for bringing a personal injury suit was just 2 years from the date the injury occurred.
That was the company's primary defense. They argued that because the girls had left the factory years ago, their right to sue had expired long before they even knew they were sick.
The concept of a discovery rule where the clock starts when you discover the injury didn't exist yet in this context.
The company lawyers deliberately used delay tactics, filing endless motions, asking for continuances, dragging the process out.
They were quite literally waiting for the plaintiffs to die.
But finally, Grace Fryer found a young, crusading lawyer named Raymond Berry.
And she was joined by 4 other former dial painters: Edna Hussman, Catherine Schaub, and 2 sisters, Quinta McDonald and Albina Larice.
The press dubbed them the Radium Girls.
By the time the case finally got a hearing in Chancery Court in January 1928, the physical toll on the women was devastating.
The newspapers described them as the Society of the Living Dead.
When it came time to take the oath on the witness stand, 2 of the women were bedridden and had to testify from their homes.
The ones who made it to the courtroom were so weak and their bones so fragile that they couldn't even raise their right arms to swear the oath.
But Raymond Berry had a brilliant scientific strategy to prove the company's culpability.
He enlisted the help of an unsung heroine in this story, a 30-year-old physicist named Elizabeth Hughes.
She worked at the National Bureau of Standards, which is now NIST.
Hughes had profound expertise in measuring radioactivity using a device called a gold leaf electroscope.
This is a fascinating piece of scientific history. The electroscope was a small lead-lined chamber with a tiny suspended gold leaf.
When exposed to ionizing radiation, the air inside ionized, causing the gold leaf to move. The faster it moved, the more radioactive the sample.
Hughes didn't just measure the girls' clothing or their bones, she measured their very breath.
She had the 5 women breathe into a complex apparatus.
Yeah.
They exhaled through bottles of calcium chloride to remove moisture, glass wool to remove dust, and sulfuric acid to trap other chemicals.
The only thing left entering the electroscope was air and radon gas.
The radioactive byproduct of the radium decaying inside their skeletons.
Hughes testified that for all 5 women, the gold leaf discharged and moved at least twice as fast as the normal background rate.
She proved, definitively and scientifically, that these women had ingested so much radium that they were literally exhaling toxic radioactive gas with every breath.
The evidence was insurmountable, and the public outcry was deafening.
Newspapers across the country were covering the trial of the dying girls.
When USRC asked for another months-long delay because their experts were supposedly traveling abroad for the summer, the judge and the public revolted.
The company realized they were going to lose, both in court and in the court of public opinion.
In the autumn of 1928, the company agreed to settle out of court.
The terms were significant for the time. Each of the 5 radium girls received a lump sum of $10,000.
Which is about $188,000 today.
Plus, all of their past and future medical and legal bills paid, and a $600 a year pension for the rest of their lives.
That it was a tragic victory.
As Edna Husman told a reporter, they just wanted the money so they could have some of the comforts and joys of life before we go.
The settlement provided financial security for their families, but it couldn't buy them time.
All 5 of the New Jersey radium girls died within a few years of the settlement.
While you might think this massive, highly publicized settlement would force the entire industry to shut down or radically change, that wasn't the case.
The narrative shifts now to the Midwest, to Ottawa, Illinois, where the Radium Dial Company was operating.
You'd think the executives in Illinois would see the New Jersey case and stop lip-pointing immediately.
But they didn't. They actively hid the news from their workers.
When the Ottawa girls started seeing articles about New Jersey, management explicitly told them that the paint used in Illinois was perfectly safe.
That it was a different formula entirely,
Hmm.
and that the New Jersey girls were just suffering from viral infections.
It was the exact same playbook of denial and deceit.
The Radium Dial Company even instituted glass pens instead of brushes for a brief period.
But because the workers were paid by the piece, the slow glass pens cut into their wages.
So management quietly allowed them to go back to the camel hair brushes and the deadly lip pointing.
The tragedy repeated itself. In the mid-1920s, a young woman named Margaret Peg Looney became one of the first in Ottawa to fall ill.
She suffered from anemia, severe hip pain, and her teeth started falling out. She eventually collapsed at work.
The company's reaction was horrific.
They took Peg to a company-controlled hospital, refused to let her family visit her, and told everyone she had diphtheria to justify quarantining her.
She died there at age 24.
When she died, the company tried to bury her immediately in the middle of the night to prevent an independent autopsy.
Her family intervened and demanded a Catholic funeral. But by the time their own doctor arrived for the autopsy, the company doctors had already finished and removed the evidence.
It was an outright cover-up.
The fight in Illinois was eventually spearheaded in the 1930s by a woman named Catherine Donahue.
Like the others, she had developed a severe limp and agonizing pain. The Radium Dial Company fired her in 1931.
And their stated reason wasn't poor performance. They fired her because her limping was, quote, causing too much talk among the other girls.
Catherine Donahue was a fighter. She found a Chicago doctor who confirmed she had radium poisoning.
And she gathered other sick dial painters to form a group the press called the Society of the Living Dead.
They were represented by a brilliant attorney named Leonard Grossman Sr., who took their case entirely pro bono because the women were absolutely destitute from medical bills.
Grossman took the case to the Illinois Industrial Commission. Illinois was slightly ahead of New Jersey, having adopted a more progressive workers' compensation law.
But the trial was grueling. By the time of the hearing in 1938, Catherine Donahue was in the final stages of the disease.
She weighed just over 60 pounds.
The scene described in the sources is heart-wrenching. She was so weak that she collapsed during her testimony.
The commission actually had to move the hearing to her living room so she could testify from her deathbed.
Leonard Grossman delivered a blistering closing argument, calling the company a predator and pointing out that the radium would continue to bombard Catherine through her very casket.
And they won.
In the spring of 1938, the Illinois Industrial Commission ruled in favor of the women.
It was the first time radium dial painters won state-sanctioned compensation.
But, mirroring New Jersey, it was a hollow victory for Catherine Donahue.
She died shortly after the initial ruling before the company's endless appeals finally reached the U.S. Supreme Court, which upheld the decision in 1939.
We have to mention the ultimate corporate sleaze move here.
Joseph Kelly, the president of the Radium Dial Company, saw the writing on the wall.
Before the final payouts could be enforced, he essentially bankrupted Radium Dial and opened a brand new company called Luminous Processes just a few blocks away in Ottawa.
He shuffled the corporate assets to dodge liability, and, shockingly, Luminous Processes continued doing the exact same work.
Painting dials for the military, and they hired many of the exact same girls.
Luminous Processes continued operating and continued exposing workers to radiation all the way until 1978.
1978. It's mind-blowing that it went on that long.
But the suffering of the radium girls in New Jersey, Illinois, and Connecticut did not happen in a vacuum.
It generated a massive scientific harvest that fundamentally changed the course of human history.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the tragedy provided the medical and scientific community with the first long-term, large-scale data set on internal radiation exposure.
In the 1930s, a physics professor at MIT named Rob Lee Evans began studying the surviving dial painters.
Evans tracked them down, measured the radium in their bodies using newly designed lead-lined iron rooms, and correlated their body burden with their symptoms.
He treated these women as a vital reservoir of scientific information. Through this painstaking work, Evans established the very first standard for internal radiation protection.
He set the maximum permissible body burden for radium at 0.1 microcuries.
This threshold became the gold standard globally for decades. It was the line between life and death.
And the timing of Evans's research and the legacy of the Radium Girls could not have been more critical.
Because right as this standard was being established, the world entered the atomic age.
During World War II, the United States launched the Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb.
This required thousands of scientists and industrial workers to handle vast quantities of radioactive materials, specifically plutonium.
Plutonium, like radium, is an alpha emitter that deposits directly into the bones.
Glenn Seaborg, the lead nuclear chemist on the Manhattan Project, was well aware of the dial painters.
He actually wrote in his diary about this disturbing vision he had of his own laboratory workers suffering the horrific fate of the Radium Girls.
Because of that haunting vision, Seaborg and the medical directors of the Manhattan Project demanded extreme safety protocols that were virtually unprecedented.
They mandated the use of fume hoods, lead-lined glove boxes, and strict contamination monitoring.
They even traveled to the surviving dial plants in Boston to study their improved safety measures.
An official from the Atomic Energy Commission later admitted a profound truth. If it hadn't been for the Radium Girls, the management of the Manhattan Project might have rejected those extreme, expensive safety precautions.
Without the dial painters acting as an involuntary warning system, thousands of atomic workers would almost certainly have been poisoned.
The Radium Girls effectively saved the lives of the scientists who built the atomic age and countless nuclear workers since.
Their legacy literally protected the world. But their story also has this lingering, eerie aftermath that is hard to shake.
We mentioned that radium has a half-life of 1,600 years. That means it doesn't just go away when the person dies.
This leads to some truly macabre realities. In the late 1980s, a documentary filmmaker visited Ottawa, Illinois, with an activist carrying a Geiger counter.
When they walked through the cemetery and held the counter over the graves of the former dial painters, women who had been buried for half a century, the machine began clicking rapidly.
The bones inside those caskets were still highly radioactive, and they will be for over a millennium.
When they exhumed the body of Mary Cavallo, one of the New Jersey dial painters whose sister fought for justice, tests revealed her bones contained 1,000 times the legal safe limit of radium.
And it wasn't just the graves. The factory sites themselves became environmental nightmares.
In both Orange, New Jersey and Ottawa, Illinois, the factory buildings were eventually demolished.
But because no one fully respected the longevity of the radiation, The contaminated rubble was often used as landfill.
In Ottawa, radioactive bricks and soil were dispersed around the town, used as fill beneath private homes, businesses, and even schools.
In the 1970s and 80s, the Environmental Protection Agency had to step in.
The former USRC site in Orange and the Luminous Processes site in Ottawa became massive EPA Superfund sites.
Inspectors found radiation levels in some areas that were thousands of times higher than safe limits.
They had to excavate thousands of tons of radioactive soil right out of the middle of residential neighborhoods.
It's a stark reminder that the corporate negligence didn't just kill the workers. It poisoned the very earth of the communities that hosted them.
The companies fought tooth and nail to wiggle out of paying for those environmental cleanups, just as they had fought to avoid paying the medical bills of the dying girls.
It's a heavy, heavy story. But as we bring this deep dive full circle, it is so vital to remember what these women achieved.
Every single time you walk into a workplace and see a safety poster, every time you are handed protective equipment, every time a company is fined for exposing workers to hazardous chemicals, you are looking at the legacy of the Radium girls.
They were the ultimate bellwethers of danger. Before their highly publicized legal battles, the legal framework in America heavily favored the employer.
If you got sick at work, it was considered your own fault or just bad luck.
The Radium girls established the fundamental legal precedent that an employer has a moral and legal duty to provide a safe working environment, and that they can be held financially liable if they fail.
Their fight led directly to the expansion of occupational disease labor laws across the country.
And eventually, the momentum generated by their sacrifice culminated in the passage of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration Act, OSHA.
The modern safety net that protects American workers is, quite literally, written in the blood of Grace Fryer, Catherine Donahue, Molly Maggia, and thousands of other shining women.
They proved that workers' lives matter more than corporate profit margins.
They stood up to multi-million-dollar corporations from their deathbeds, enduring horrific pain and social smearing, simply so that the girls who came after them wouldn't have to suffer the same fate.
It is a level of courage that is hard to fathom.
And as we wrap up today, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over.
We look back at the 1920s radium craze with disbelief. We think, how could they be so foolish to drink radioactive water and paint it on their teeth?
But that craze was driven by a blind, enthusiastic trust in a miraculous new scientific discovery fueled by aggressive corporate marketing that prioritized profits over long-term testing.
So look around at the world today.
Look at the rapid technological, chemical, and biological advancements we eagerly consume right now.
Think about the microplastics, the forever chemicals, the new synthetic materials, or even the digital algorithms shaping our society.
What is our generation's radium?
What are we currently bringing into our homes, putting on our bodies, or subjecting our workers to, simply because the long-term dangers haven't caught up with the corporate profit margins yet?
It's a chilling question, and it's exactly why understanding history isn't just about the past, it's about protecting our future.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the story of the Radium girls.
Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking out for each other, and as always, stay curious.